Hi everyone, Joseph Lavoie here. Welcome to Business is Politics. Today I have for you a clip of a longer form interview I've done with Christine Quiqley, my brilliant colleague from Crestview Strategy. Christine, in the long form interview, is going to walk us through the implications of Labour's big win in the UK and what it means for business. But I thought for today we'll focus on one aspect of that interview, and it's the concept around paying attention to the electoral maps. Understanding how government won its massive majority has a huge impact for how, and big considerations for how it's going to govern. So we have a conversation around electoral maps and the need for businesses to pay attention to that and what it means in the context of this specific government. I hope you enjoy it.
It's worth bearing in mind that in terms of the swing that Keir Starmer needed to achieve to get any majority at all, he had to deliver a bigger swing than Tony Blair did in 1997, and he did that and then some. So what we've seen is we've got, a first past the post system here in the UK. Labour has about 2/3 of the seats in Parliament, and it got that on about 1/3 of the vote share. Now, it did that because actually fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn did in 2019. But Labour traditionally has been incredibly strong in a number of our cities, actually most big UK cities. But what happens is that it tends to absolutely stack up those votes. So I live in East London, in Walthamstow. My MP used to have a majority of 35,000. She doesn't. She has a majority of kind of 20-odd thousand. But Labour doesn't need to be stacking up votes in those constituencies. What it has done, because it's always had these strengths in cities, it's won a lot of towns and it's won some really quite rural communities as well. I think that's going to be a real challenge for Labour because it's really good on kind of city issues, but actually having to deal with rural issues around farming and agriculture. The agri-food sector here in the UK is obviously incredibly important. Looking at kind of economic development in towns, looking at tourism, rural broadband, for example, is a big issue in lots of parts of the country. So that electoral map is going to change some of the priorities, which I think is going to be really interesting. But we did see a lot of tactical voting. So in lots of parts of the UK, people just wanted to get rid of the Tories. So they might have voted Labour or they might have voted Liberal Democrat, but Labour has really picked up a lot of seats from people who maybe don't normally vote for them. So I think Starmer and his team have now got 5 years to kind of show people that they were right. And the biggest way they're going to do that is by getting the economy back on track. So I think that's why we're getting this really laser-like focus. Everything has got to be about growth and jobs.
I think the mistake a lot of people could make would be to assume that this Labour government is like a previous Labour government. But what you described about the requirement now to govern for so many of these rural constituencies, I do think has implications for the types of stakeholders they're going to have to engage with, the types of issues that they need to focus on. And so it's very handy, I think, when a new government wins to look at where they got those gains and how that's going to impact the way they govern. But I didn't know that. That was very helpful. Thank you. So let's talk about that on this theme then. If I want to speak Labour's language in 2024, 2025, what changes would I need to make if I become so used to engaging with the previous government, I've become so used to dealing with the Tories? What are some, highline top 1, 2, 3 things I'd have to really wrap my head around to speak their language and be effective?
So we've seen a really interesting language change in the first couple of days, actually. So the previous government, the Conservative government, had this policy of levelling up the country. So effectively, we're very aware that productivity, economic growth is very concentrated in London, and we need to actually deliver that in other parts of the country. There are real issues there. So the previous government talked about levelling up the country so that other people were performing in the same, or other parts of the country were performing in the same way as London was. Labour doesn't use that language, and not only does it not use that language, it's actually changed the name of the relevant government department. So we had a ministry for communities and local government, or housing, communities and local government, for years and years. The Tories came in and called it the Department for Levelling Up. Didn't really catch on. And they've changed it back. They say, levelling up was a buzzword, it was a bit of PR, it didn't really mean anything in terms of policy. To go back to calling it the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. So they are already looking at language quite carefully. And I think, as you say, like tuning into the kind of language that parties are using is really, really crucial. But more broadly, what I would say to businesses that are trying to engage with this new government is to really look at what Labour's five missions are and the way they talk about it and to reflect those back. So, because they know that they don't necessarily have a lot of time, they have a lot of things that they want to get done. I think if you are framing what you want to achieve and what your ask is, in the context of those five missions, I think it's going to be much, much easier to get a hearing. And that language is all kind of publicly available. You're seeing it in speeches all of the time. And the kind of last thing I think is maybe a bit harder for businesses to tap into, but a lot of the language that Starmer and his team have been using is very much about aspiration. So in the context of the cost of living crisis, we've seen, a situation where here in the UK, we've got more food banks than we do pubs at the moment. A
Are you
lot of people,
serious? You
absolutely,
you have a
absolutely.
lot of pubs.
We do have a lot of pubs.